Hello, today I am joined by Ian Griffiths, who is a sports podiatrist, and you're at Pure Sports Medicine amongst other places, but I seem to be doing the whole staff and Pure Sports Medicine here. So it's not as much as I love the guys there. It's not meant to be a promotion for Pure Sports Medicine. But yeah, how are you doing?
I'm well, thanks, mate. Thanks for having me.
No, thanks for coming on. And I do love your backdrop there. So I'm a massive fan of professional development books, and I can see a few ones in there. What if you had to pick three books from there? Which would you take?
So yeah, I've got two bookcases actually. One's just out of sight. All of my
Oh, we don't show off. Don't show off.
yeah, a bit of a flex there. All of my work-related ones, my physics, biomechanics ones are out of sight. I guess this is the one, not the self-help one. It's where all the books about the Stoics are. I'm really into Stoic philosophy. Not saying I'm good at practicing it, but I've got all of the Stoic books there and all of the kind of usual stuff that you'd expect. The Matthew Syed books, the Richard Wiseman books, the kind of behavioural science kind of stuff. So that's kind of how I like to spend my time when I'm not reading about physics and biomechanics. Yeah.
Right. So like the Ryan Holiday stuff and all of his Stoic.
Exactly. Love him. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So if you had to pick one bookcase, then that one, as in the clinical piece, or that one behind you, which would you go for?
That's a good question. I read off of this one behind me a lot more, and we're a book household as well. We don't have Kindles. My two boys, we're a reading house. We take books even on holiday. I know the utility of a Kindle is, so much easier. You can take 6 books with you, but we just like hardbacks in this house, and we like going to the shelf and picking them off. And I go to this shelf loads more than I do the biomechanics one. Not to say I know everything about biomechanics. I reach for those ones if I'm writing something up work-wise. But yeah, if I had to choose, I'd probably go this one, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's interesting really, because that's where I'm even though sports science background, I'm far more fascinated in those ones there, and I'll have a load of those titles. It is interesting that bounce one does stand out more than others, and you picked it out there as well.
Yeah.
Quite interesting. Yeah, no, I think it is really fascinating, all that whole world of things, and it's quite nice being able to go and dip in. Like Gabby, my fiance, she's actually banned me from buying any more books because it's addictive, isn't it? When you just go in and it's a shop and say, "Oh, I've not seen that one. What's that one?"
Yeah, or I'll do the thing. I don't know if you do this. I'll buy a book, and then I'll download the audiobook version of it, and then when I'm on my long runs, I'll listen to the audiobook. So I've got the book on my shelf. I've read it, or I've had it read to me, but I've never actually broken the spine of the book. My wife tells me off for that all the time. But they just look. I think, listen, a house with books. I'm sure there's a famous quote that someone said about it somewhere, but it's the sort of house I think people need to be in. Yeah.
I agree. So we're looking at buying a place now, and genuinely, one of the biggest motivators for me is that we can have a space where I can have the office, I can have a backdrop like that, and have it really set up. Not that I want it in the backdrop, but just having something where it's there. I can go and dip in, feel like you're really absorbing something fascinating.
Yeah. There's a great Facebook group. You should check it out. I'll send it to you once we finish recording. There's a whole Facebook group where people upload pictures of their bookcases and of their reading nooks to give you kind of inspiration and ideas. I'll send it to you. It's right up my street. And let me ask you a question. I'm a bit of a stickler for my organisation of my bookshelf. I like them to all be, moved forward so that they're not all jutting out at different depths. I like to arrange them in height order. I've got a friend that arranges his in colour order. So all the red books are together, all the yellow books are together. Where do you stand? And then I've got another friend, by the way, it's chaotic. You look at it, it's like a bomb's gone off. Where do you stand on the organisation?
I stand in that when my mum comes round, she does in whatever order she wants, and she is meticulous for everything from a height. I'm not sure the exact criteria. I've got a bookcase down there actually, and she will go through it and she'll reorder it. She's like, Andrew, do you mind me doing this? And I'm like, yeah, well, I'm doing it anyway. So then that's just inbuilt in her. So I've got an element of her, like 10% of her organizational skills. But I saying that, I do like stuff. We've got one in the office where we've got a few books of people that I've interviewed in various different things, and I do like them in that. So I've got a modicum of it, but my mum's in a different league for that sort of stuff, as my dad will definitely testify to.
Yeah, that's the way to do it. My kids sometimes move books around, or they'll push one in to see how long it takes me to notice. It's never ever gone more than a day before I've noticed. I mean, I acknowledge this is a me problem. I have some slight issues here.
It does sound like it. It does sound like it. So for you then, so how did you get involved in wanting to move into the area of podiatry, sports medicine?
In many ways, it's a bit of a typical story, and in some it's not. I'll try and give you the abridged version. You know, like any kid at school, you have the things at school, within school, academically, that you're showing a bit more promise at. I wouldn't say I was a great student as a very young kid, but it was all science and maths. They were where my strengths were. I wasn't particularly creative. I struggled with, writing in English, imagination stuff. History, geography didn't rock my boat. So it was all science at school, science and maths. And then again, I think like many boys of my age growing up in the 80s, outside of school, it was sport. There was no internet. I try and tell my kids this. There was no internet. There was no Netflix. It was, you get home from school and you're out until it's dark playing sport. And we played everything. And again, I was a very average student. I was a very average sportsman, but I was wildly passionate about sport. So when you get to a point where you're making decisions, or at school they're saying to you, you need to make some decisions. When you bring science and sport together, as I'm sure you know, you end up with a list of more often than not, medical or allied health professions. So I looked at all of them and sort of gave them a bit of a glance, didn't think too much of it. And I have to confess, I mailed in my GCSEs dramatically. It just wasn't important to me at the time. I was, young and playing a lot of football and trying to get some success on the football pitch, trying to get some success with girls, all of that usual sort of stuff. And I just completely mailed in my GCSEs and happened to ace them. Now, this was the worst thing that ever happened to me because it gave me a bit of a false understanding of how hard you need to work to get certain grades. So I went into my A levels, biology, chemistry, and maths, and mailed them in. And funnily enough, the jump from GCSE to A level, I wasn't. You can't mail in, at least back then, you couldn't mail in your A level. So failed spectacularly, and didn't really know what to do. So I did what any kid would do, and I basically got a group of mates. We went down to Newquay in a camper van, and we spent 6 weeks surfing, just pretending like reality wasn't a real thing. And I'll never forget, I rang because we didn't have mobile phones at the time, and my only rule my mother had given me was to ring her once a week on a Friday to tell her I was alive from a payphone. I know the younger listeners are listening going, what is this old man talking about? So I remember one particular Friday, it was about 4 weeks in, I called my mum and said, yep, just let you know I'm alive. And she said, oh, you need to come back. I was like, what do you mean? She said, you've got a job interview on Tuesday next week. And she'd applied for a job for me on my behalf. I'm not even sure that's legal now. God bless my late mum, God bless her. She can't get in trouble for it now. But she'd applied for a job at the local hospital in the pharmacy as what was the title for it at the time? A pharmacy technician. So a hospital pharmacy where you are basically fulfilling prescriptions for wards and inpatients and outpatients and ICU under the supervision of a pharmacist. And you had to go to college to do, I guess, what the equivalent of it being an NVQ or a BTEC, whatever it was back then, in pharmaceutical science. So anyway, I just didn't really have much say when it came to my mum and these things, but she said, you're coming home, I was coming home. So I got myself home from Newquay. I went to this job interview that I didn't apply for, that I had no preparation for. I got the job, and it was, I'll never forget, I started on £7,000 a year. It's a lofty salary. And I was in the pharmacy 4 days a week. And then 1 day a week, I was going to college for 2 years. And at the end of the 2 years, you became a qualified pharmacy technician. And she said, I'll never forget, she sat me down, she said to me, I don't care if you are a great student or a terrible student, whether you get straight A's or whether you get, you completely fail exams. She said, that's never really bothered me. But what bothers me is we don't know what you're capable of. If you try your best and you fail everything, fine. Like, not everyone's academic. That's not how we measure success in our lives. But how do we know what you're even capable of? Because you've just half-arsed everything in life to this point. And as only mums can, they see right through you. So she said, just make me a promise that for 2 years, you'll just apply yourself. You'll just have a go. I was like, okay, fine, I promise. So anyway, I did it. I did really rather well in this pharmaceutical science thing. I won an award. I got headhunted by GlaxoSmithKline to go and work for them. I had all these opportunities suddenly kind of come to my door just because I'd made a bit of an effort, really. And then one of the pharmacists said to me in the hospital, like, you're too good. You're too good to be a pharmacy technician. That's not how she worded it. She was much more subtle about it. She said, you might even be able to get into university to study pharmacy with this qualification, with what you've got now, and the fact that you have studied A levels. So I made some inquiries because I thought to myself at this point, listen, I didn't grow up wanting to be a pharmacist, but at this point I thought this is my route to get a degree and to get a more of a profession or a vocation and maybe a bigger salary and all those kind of things. But deep down I thought, is pharmacy for me? I'm a people person, really, and in pharmacy you don't get to talk to people a lot. You're counting out pills, you're checking drug dosages in the BNF. It's really quite interesting stuff, but I didn't see myself doing it. But I thought it's my way to get a degree. So when I applied to a few universities, they came back to me and said, you need to prove that you've studied A-level chemistry. And I said, well, I have. And they said, you haven't, because you've got an ungraded. That's how bad I found it. So they said, even if you had an E, we would let you in this September, but there's no evidence that you've ever studied it. So I didn't know what my options were. So I decided to go to night school, and I go to night school. And this would have been sort of every Tuesday night after working all day in the pharmacy, cycling to this local college, night school, intense A-level chemistry. And I sat there, and in the first 10 minutes when they started talking about covalent bonds and things, and I was like, oh God. And chemistry's always been my least favorite of all of the combined sciences. And I get chatting to the guy next to me, and he says, what's your story? So I basically tell him the version that I've just told you. I said, what's your story? And he said, oh, I want to be a podiatrist. And I said to him, like a lot of people have said to me since that time, what's podiatry? And he sits there, and it's a 3-hour class, and for the next 2 hours we're not listening, we're just chatting, and he's telling me what podiatry is, and he's selling it to me. He's telling me all the things that podiatrists study and all the how fascinating foot and ankle mechanics are. And essentially he was a bit of a mature student, and he just needed to prove to apply to podiatry that he had recent study, because he hadn't studied for sort of 5 years plus or something like that. And the reason I said, why are you doing chemistry? It doesn't sound like you need chemistry for that. And he said, it's the only, based on my work and my family schedule, it's the only class that fits in my agenda. So he's like, I need to study something recent and science. I'm doing chemistry because I'm only free on Tuesday nights. But I was like, so you're telling me this sounds fascinating, this profession that you've just described to me, and I don't need chemistry for it, which is the only reason I'm here. And I'm hating what I'm hearing at the front of the classroom right now. And that night I rode home. I applied to a couple of universities to podiatry. I got accepted to start that September. So that is, I said that was the abridged version. It was as abridged as I could make it, but ultimately it's a very typical start, but a very atypical end, because on that list of school, when back when I sort of had all the list of things, podiatry was on that list. That list of, here's all a list of health profession. You like sport, you like science, here's all the list. Podiatry was on that list. I didn't give it a second glance. I didn't grow up wanting to be a podiatrist. I still, the thing that bugs me, Andy, is I don't know this guy. I don't know whether he went on to study podiatry. I don't know whether I would now consider him a colleague or a peer. I can't remember him. I don't know if he ever remembers me, but like he's changed my life, this guy. 2 hours I met him, 2-3 hours, one night. And here we are. This is the profession I love, I care deeply about. And yeah, that was a real sliding doors moment, I guess.
Well, there's a little surprise. He is here today. Yeah, no, it is amazing that like you've got that has changed your life in terms of that. Just before we go into that bit though, like why were you so good at that pharmacy bit, and like what did GlaxoSmithKline, like what did they have you earmarked to do?
I don't know. Ultimately, I think I was just good at it because I tried. It was the first thing I'd ever tried at academically. How old was I at this point? 19. And honestly, I'd never really studied. I'd never revised. I'd never tried. So I just kind of really, really got stuck into it. And then what I realized, because of the way my brain's wired, like we were talking about earlier with my bookshelf, I'm very, listen, we didn't label things back then, but, I've since been told that I have psychological inflexibility. When you look at the autistic spectrum disorder, I know we're all on it somewhere, but, I've been placed on there by certain specialists at certain times. And what I realize is I'm all or nothing. I'm either, if I'm into something, I'm into it. I'm committing to it 100%. And if I'm not into something, I've got no time for it. So it turns out that when I apply myself to study, I really enjoyed it. I enjoyed the cognitive sort of strain that it brought. And actually, there's a lot of stuff in pharmacology, and people that have, listen to my talk. I when I speak now, I give talks on podiatric topics. I lean heavily on pharmacology analogies a lot of the time, because I think there's a lot of stuff about pharmacology that actually applies to daily life, the pharmacodynamics, pharmacokinetics. So yeah, I just found it really interesting. The more I studied, the more interesting I found it. The more interesting I found it, the more I got stuck into it. And obviously, it won't surprise anyone to know that the more you apply yourself to something, the more you excel in it. And I think, at the time, I was told that I had the highest grade in this topic that the college had ever seen. And then I met the mayor of that. It was in an outer London borough college. Then I met the mayor to receive my award. And then I think GlaxoSmithKline, I'd imagine they've probably just got their ears out for this kind of thing. I don't know what the role was. It was something very much you're going to be analysing things in I visualised a white coat and a laboratory. And like I say, I just never felt like that was my calling. So I never even went to, they asked to meet with me. And at that point, I'd sort of decided, look, I don't want to go into the pharmaceutical business. And I had the pharmacist telling me, you can go to university over here. So it was like, get a job or go to university. And I just found my appetite for study. I was 19 years old, 20 years old, whoever I was. And it was a bit late, obviously, but I just finally found a real appetite for study. And I thought, well, that sounds like university might be a better route for me to take. So yeah, no idea what the role was. I wonder how different life may have been. Well, very different is the answer if I'd have gone down that road.
Yeah, no, it's really interesting. And so when you were chatting with that guy then, what were you picturing then? Because I think podiatry then, chiropody was probably still around as a separate profession, was it then? So like, what were you envisaging it being?
Yeah, so this was for context, we were having this chat in 1999. So it certainly wasn't then what it is now. But that said, it was definitely moved on from the prior kind of thought process that, a podiatrist or a chiropodist was someone who, cut toenails. Not those are really important things, by the way, for health and mobility, particularly in the elderly. But he was saying to me, look, like now it's not just old people's feet and toenails and calluses and verrucas. He basically said, look, there's a whole specialism of podopediatrics where we look at, the developing child. There's sports podiatry. And as soon as he said the word sports, I was all in. It was like, you can see sports people, you can assess the way they move. Sports people are some of the most injured people on the planet, and the vast majority of their injuries are lower limb. And being sports mad, you suddenly see a way in. But he himself wasn't massively into sports. He didn't sell sports to me, which is now my area especially. He sold the whole profession. He was all in on it. He was talking about, from memory, he was very much into tissue viability and wound care, and obviously the diabetic foot, a large portion of what all of us do when we first graduate. And well, back then when we went into the NHS, I spent my first 2-3 years seeing the at-risk foot, so diabetes, rheumatoid arthritis, I even saw leprosy. We see it all. So the first couple of years of my career didn't even look like my career does now, but I knew that was all part of it, and it gives you a good grounding. So yeah, he sold the whole profession as just this profession that does certain things that a lot of other professions can't do. Obviously, there's overlap, and it keeps people on their feet. It keeps people mobile. That thought of kind of helping people, that appealed more to me than sitting in a lab. Yeah.
So what happened then?
I thought to myself, I applied to. I looked at a couple of different podiatry schools at the time. There was only 13 across the entire UK, 13 universities you could study at. I think only, I don't know what the numbers are now, but there was, from memory, a couple in Scotland, a couple in Ireland, one in Wales, one in Cardiff, and I think there was 8 or 9 in the UK. So I looked at them, and the ones I narrowed it down to at the time was Southampton, Northampton, and where else did I look? I think Huddersfield as well. I'm a southern boy, really, so what it's like. We get nosebleeds if we go too far north for too long. So Northampton felt a bit too far north for me, I'll be honest, even at the time. But when I looked, the thing that sold Northampton to me over all of the others really was they talked about how they had links with professional football teams, and how in your third year you might go to professional football teams. And I was like, that was the stuff of dreams to me. I've just gone from putting pills in a bottle and putting labels on them for £7,000 a year to like well, hang on a minute, I might be getting a degree and seeing professional footballers. And as a young kid who had ridiculous aspirations of being a footballer, like that's dream world stuff. So it was Northampton. I applied to Northampton, Southampton, had interviews at both, got offers for both, but Northampton, the football stuff completely sold it to me. And then September 2000, that's it. I'm suddenly a full-time student. I'm living in Northampton with a load of strangers. I'm called the old. I'm 20 for context. I am 21, and I'm being called an old man by all of my. Because 21 doesn't sound old to me now, sadly, but I was a mature student because everyone else was 18, straight out of A levels. But yeah, what then follows is probably the best 3 years of my life. I probably make I do make some of the closest friends I have in life. Since that, we're all married with children now, and we've all been to each other's weddings. We've all seen each other's children grow up. Like, yeah, just absolute fairy tale stuff, really.
But what was so good about it?
About the degree? Yeah,
the 3 years.
Yeah, well, again, at this point I'm 21 and I've never lived anywhere except at home. I'm away from home. I'm having to learn how to cook and all those things that actually I think, I talk to my children now, and there's absolutely no pressure for me on going into academia or going to university from an academic perspective. But I think the stuff that university gives you that you didn't understand at the time, I was suddenly living with friends from, one of my closest friends I live at university was from Wakefield. I'd never heard a Yorkshire accent before. It was fascinating to me. I had a friend from Nuneaton in Warwickshire, a friend from Wakefield. There was me. I was from Kent originally. One of the other guys was from down in Surrey. And suddenly then at weekends, we're going to each other's hometowns. We're seeing different parts of the UK. We're meeting different... Your just worldview just opens up. And then, of course, there's just the study. At that point, I was a fully converted nerd. I was all in. I'm not saying we didn't have fun and we didn't sort of go to the student union and drink snakebite and black and all that nonsense, but I was a nerd. Like in a year's time, I'd gone from someone who'd never really revised and mailed it in to just being what people would call very bookish, and that's continued. I'm 47 now, and my kids look at me and be like, "Dad, you're such a nerd," and I'm proud of that. Like, I'm totally proud of that. So yeah, it gave me everything. It gave me that ability to consolidate what was then a new love for knowledge, reading, education. It gave me all the life skills. It opened up my worldview beyond the little place I'd grown up in Kent. I really hope other than the cost that's now associated, I hope my kids go for those reasons.
Yeah. I think the whole thing is, the studies are definitely a key part of it, but I would probably agree that more of it is that meeting new people and all of that bit of it. And it is just very different, isn't it? Meeting people outside of your normal environment, and does feel quite cosmopolitan.
Yeah. I don't know that Northampton's ever been described as cosmopolitan, but yeah.
Well, I was in Alsager, which definitely wasn't. That was at the sports campus for MMU. So
well, I did my masters there, so I know Alsager well. I know the Indian restaurant in Alsager well. I applied to my masters, jumping ahead to MMU, Manchester Metropolitan University. I thought, I've heard so many great things about Manchester and about what a great city is, and how all my friends from Manchester tell me it's superior to London. Let's see if they're right. And I found myself in Alsager.
Crewe campus. It's the Cheshire campus. It's like, you what?
Yeah, exactly. I was conned a bit there, but no, that was a good time as well.
Yeah. So how did that happen then? Like, which course were you doing at Alsager?
It doesn't exist now, but at the time it was, they had a PG Cert, PG Dip, MSc kind of offering, which I think was called, if memory serves, Sports and Exercise Medicine or Sports and Exercise Science, and then it had a sort of parentheses with the route you took. So there was Sports and Exercise Medicine, nutrition, Sports and Exercise Medicine, etc., etc. And there were, at the time, and this was early or mid 2000s, there was one called Sports Podiatry. It was only a PG Cert at the time. PG Cert, Sports and Exercise Medicine, Sports Podiatry, and it was a great little PG Cert. Again, at the time, I was just coming out of the NHS and just thinking about moving into private practice. But once again, I was in a room with with people who weren't just podiatrists. And in NHS podiatry, you'd been very, very much in the podiatry department. Suddenly I'm in a room with physios and osteopaths and sports therapists and that kind of what we now know as a multidisciplinary team, which is how we work all day, every day. But back then, mid 2000s, that was the first time I was in a room going, oh, well, people look at this differently to me, and that's a good thing. So yeah, it doesn't exist anymore. And then after that, I sort of said to them, like, what are my MSc options? So then I sort of used that and sort of jumped onto the MSc again. What was it called at the time? MSc sports and exercise medicine, and then in parentheses sports injury. So it's the sports injury route. So again, I'm not sure if that still exists now, because I know that campus doesn't exist anymore, does it? They've
it's a housing estate now.
Yeah. So I was very lucky that I did PG Cert in sports podiatry and then MSc in sports and exercise medicine, sports injury. And of course, this was before I wasn't aware of many master's level options for podiatrists, at least, that were available to me. So yeah, I saw that, thought, oh, a couple of years in Manchester will be great. A couple of years in Crewe were okay.
Yeah, no, it's interesting, isn't it, when you're developing onto these new things? And again, it's just another bit of learning, whether it is the actual course or just being around different people. So what was the landscape for you then, in terms of what was your work at that point? Like, what was you were looking to get into football or sport, but like, how was it made up?
Yeah, so when I graduated in 2003, back as was the norm then, you went straight into the NHS. I know it's very different now. I don't even know. I suspect there are fewer jobs than there are graduates, but back in 2003, it was very much first job, NHS, a couple of years in the trenches, and it does feel like the trenches. So for 2003 to 2005, I was in Oxford. And I'm not saying I didn't have musculoskeletal clinics, but the vast majority was the at-risk foot. And listen, you're really at the pointy end of helping people's lives. Don't get me wrong. My friends that have moved into wound care and tissue viability, they it's probably not an exaggeration to say they save lives on a daily basis. I'm under no illusion that I have the same impact as they do, from a health perspective. But I just knew it wasn't for me. That I knew that this route into this profession was all about getting to that sports end. But I also wasn't foolish enough to think I'm going to come out of university, the ink on my BSc will still be wet, and I'll be kind of working in professional sport. I knew there was going to be a pathway I'd need to take. So it was when I was in the NHS and seeing wounds all day that I would basically get home of an evening, and we worked a 9-day fortnight at that point. So I had every other Friday off. And I had a friend, that became very, very close, and he was of a similar mindset where we'd get together on our 9-day fortnights and just spend all day just reading articles, like musculoskeletal articles. So it's like, right, you're seeing wounds all day on Thursday, but don't worry, tomorrow we're going to spend all day reading about sagittal plane biomechanics or whatever it may be. So it was very much evenings, weekends, self-directed study, knowing that at some point that would come in useful. Then when I saw the masters applied to that and saw that as the kind of route out, and then like all of these things, I don't know where I stand on the whole being lucky thing versus working hard thing, because I think it's a bit more complicated than that, isn't it? But I do feel like I've been lucky, and sometimes I know people would argue with me that luck comes along, but it needs to see you working hard or something like that. But I very much just saw a job, a private practice job. I just finished my masters. I was 06, 07-ish. I was thinking about moving out of the NHS, and I just saw a job in the City of London in a physiotherapy clinic. So it's a clinic with physiotherapists primarily, but there was already a podiatrist there, and it was very much a come in and we'll mentor you, and and it was like, okay, let's just do this. Let's apply for it and see how we go. Got the job, and we were off. We were suddenly working in private practice, so we weren't seeing wounds. We were seeing a lot more. Almost at that point, immediately, 80% of it was musculoskeletal. The occasional other stuff trickled through, but it was 80% musculoskeletal work. I had my master's degree, and I still felt very green and I still knew there was a lot of way to go to evolve and develop personally, professionally. But by about 07, so within 4 years of qualifying, I was sort of on that first rung of the ladder. And it's what I try and sort of impress upon students now, like that first rung of the ladder might not be the first day you step out of university. Like you might have to do you almost have to see the long game. yeah, that was when it then progressed from there, where I was, the more musculoskeletal stuff you see, the more the more you see, the more you bounce ideas off of the MDT that I was in at that point. And working in London, it's not too long before people that trickle into your clinic that aren't just normal people, that aren't lawyers, bankers. Suddenly you get people coming in who are athletes of a certain caliber or footballers of a certain caliber. And I'm sure you know this, but in elite sport, ultimately, once you've seen a couple of players, or you've liaised with a couple of physios, before you know it, you get a bit more and a bit more and a bit more. So the elite sports stuff just kind of slowly, gradually grew, and it just then came along so insidiously that actually it was only kind of at a certain point where I stopped and I wrote down all of the teams I was working with, all of the kind of professional sports I was working with as a list, and I looked at it, and it had happened so gradually. I finally looked at it and went, God, if I could go back and tell my 10 years prior version of myself, this is what this list is going to look like. Particularly those days where I'd come home and I'd seen 25 neuroischemic ulcerations, and I remember walking in at the time, and my then girlfriend at the time, I'd walk in the front door and she'd say, "You stink." And she could smell necrosis on me, If I thought to myself, they were tough days, right? They weren't. I can see why it would be very easy to say I've made a mistake here, I've come into the wrong profession, and I can see why people sometimes say, I just don't feel like this profession is what I thought it was going to be. But you get through those days, and then you look at where you are now, and you're like, yeah, that's all part of the journey. You don't come out of university and start working in the Premier League. It's just not the way it works. So it was very, very gradual. There was definitely some luck along the way. There was a fair bit of hard work along the way. And it continues. That I'm talking like it's ended. It hasn't. It continues the same way I applied myself back in those years. I still apply myself now. It will be in a slightly different. I sort of filter it a bit differently, but the same principles are there. With regards to just not thinking you've made it. Never think you've made it, basically.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree with that. You're always learning. You're always challenging, and you never crack anything. It's like that's. Sometimes it can seem like, oh yeah, that person's done it. And then one of my mates posted something where it's like everyone does tend to look at other people and think, oh God, they really know what they're doing. And it's like, yeah, I think it's all, whereas you just never know what's going on with people on things as well. But I think the reflection piece is a really good one. And it's a really good way to think, actually, God, just have some gratitude and appreciation to think, actually, what I've done is really good, whether it's luck or hard work. Whatever, it's like, actually, look what I'm doing now.
Yeah, absolutely. Reflective practice isn't something that I think comes easy to humans. Reflection's difficult to do. It's kind of a bit uncomfortable. I've never been someone who's been very intentional about it up until more recently, when I did a teaching qualification, and actually there was an awful lot of stuff about kind of encouraging reflection in your students, but also reflecting as an educator. So it's only really been in the last couple of years I think I'm getting better at reflecting, and it's something I think we can all do more of, and all practice a bit more. But yeah, it's such a valuable thing.
So what was it like when you did your first athlete that you were like, oh wow, this is cool? Who, if you can share, I don't know if you can share who it was, but like, how did it happen?
So I'm one of those people that I try and just treat everyone like a normal person, like deep down, because they are, right? Because famous people, whoever you are, you're still just a person, aren't you? And on the one hand, I say that very casually and calmly, and on the other hand, and there have definitely been some, like when people come in, when I see people from certain elite sports, top of their game, Olympians, if it's a sport I'm not particularly into, I find it very, very easy to treat those people normally, as I would, anyone else. And I try and take that vibe into sports I love and I care about deeply. My main two being football, well, three, I guess: football, golf, athletics. But that first time that big name footballer comes in is tough. On the outside, you're like, be professional. I've never been someone who tries to talk about it too much. I've certainly never been someone who get selfies with them. I just don't think that's a good vibe. I think they're coming to you as a professional. I think you should give them what they've come for. But inside you, deep within you, there is a 12-year-old boy saying, oh my God, this is this person. It's long ago. I remember the first ever famous person I saw, and again, this won't mean a lot to everyone, but I'll mention it now because it was long enough ago that I don't know how long does patient confidentiality and GDPR wasn't even a thing back then, because this was early on in that private practice, and you got to remember the era I grew up in. I grew up in I was born in the late 70s. I grew up in the 80s, and I was a teenager in the kind of early to mid 90s, and the very first what I considered famous patient I'd ever had was one of the gladiators at that time. Now, again, I know there's the gladiators on TV now. My kids adore it, and we're going to the live show soon because they love it so much, and they're telling me how amazing it is, and I'm being the old man saying, these gladiators are rubbish compared to my gladiators, like Shadow and Hunter and Jet. But yeah, the very, very first sort of, finger quotes, famous person I saw was one of the gladiators. And I really struggled to keep it together. I really, genuinely. And by the way, gladiators had finished by this point, and they'd retired, and they weren't a gladiator anymore. I mean, they were still, obviously active, but I think they moved into property development, as I recall. But in my head, I'm like, oh my God, it's a gladiator. But I think over time, you just realise after the first 5 minutes of talking to them, they're just normal people with normal worries and normal complaints and normal goals. Obviously, when you're seeing someone who's still currently, an elite sports person who's still playing, you could argue they're not normal people, and they don't have normal worries, and they don't have normal goals. So there's a bit of extra kind of stuff going on there. But yeah, another story without dropping a name. I'm a Tottenham fan, sadly, for my sins, and I remember the very first time we were going, again, he's long since retired, and we're going back to 07, 08, 09, somewhere in that latter thing. But when football was what I call like football, when you had the matchups in centre midfield of Vieira and Keane, and you had that United side of like Scholes. But even as a Southerner who supports a London team, watching Scholes, Beckham, Rooney, even before Rooney, York, Cole, Sheringham. And the Arsenal team, Henry, Bergkamp, it was dream stuff. It really, really was. And I remember seeing an Arsenal player right in that era, right in the middle of that era, and they came in with their wife, and they were lying on my couch, and I was assessing them, and they weren't English. Their wife, who also wasn't English, said to me, "Oh, do you like football?" And I sort of jokingly said, well, yeah, of course I do. We invented it. A bit of banter. And she turned to me and she said, "Who do you support?" And I'm holding an Arsenal player's feet in my hands, and I'm a Tottenham fan. And I'm ashamed to say, I thought about lying for a second. And you're in that kind of, shall I just lie? Because I don't, I grew up in Kent. My first love football-wise was Gillingham. They're the only professional team in the county of Kent. I grew up watching them when we were in old Division 4. Loads of us had trials for them. One of my mates played for them. One of my mates played in the playoff final against Man City at Old Wembley. Like it was my first love. And if I'm ever in doubt, if I was ever on a tube home late one night and a load of like aggressive drunk football fans came up to me and said, "Who do you support?" I'd always say Gillingham, because who hates? Well, some people probably hate Gillingham fans, but no Premier League fan hates Gillingham, right? So I'm there going, should I just say Arsenal? Should I say Gillingham? And in the end, I just went, you know what? Let's just go for it and see what happens. So I said Tottenham, and he's lying at this point. He's lying prone on my bed, his feet. So and I'm looking. I've got his feet, and I'll never forget. I said Tottenham. I remember he's not English, but he still gets the whole North London derby thing. And he looks over his shoulder at me and just goes, and then looks back again, and that was it. There was nothing else said. So yeah, that stuff is the kind of dream world stuff. When you're a young kid and you're football mad, and then one minute you think you're going to be in a lab counting pills for the rest of your life, and then the next minute you think, okay, I've got a degree now, but I'm looking at diabetic foot ulcers all day, and suddenly you're having banter with a player who you're watching on Match of the Day that Saturday. Like absolute dream world stuff.
Yeah, no, it's incredible, isn't it? And again, even that stuff, it's fascinating. Like even you talking about that era, I love that era, and it's you buy into what you're doing, and you think for your work that you're a part of that process of that bit of it. And so like when you were, so at that point then, what was the podiatry world like, and how much stuff was working with athletes, how much of it wasn't, like what was it like?
Yeah, I think it was, by that time, podiatric biomechanics, if you went back to sort of the 70s, the 70s, 80s, it had come on so much from that time. And particularly in the UK, we had a couple of, we had people really spearheading it. I know, Trevor, who you've spoken to in the past, who's a colleague of mine at QMUL now. We had Trevor, we had Nat Padia, amongst other people. We had a couple of people really, really pushing forward sort of podiatric biomechanics. So I don't know what the landscape looked like sort of in the late 90s. I know certainly when I speak to Trevor, he was working in football and very much, with an MSK hat on. But I think if you went back much further in time, my suspicion is, football teams, the medical team at a football club or a rugby club or whatever it may be, they had the doctor, the physio, the masseuse, etc. I suspect they probably called on a podiatrist if they had, callus, corns, nail pathology, etc. But certainly by the time I came along, in the mid 2000s, a lot of physios and doctors that worked in professional sport very much already saw the value in a podiatry opinion. So we were very much being called in to give them advice on their boots, their need or not for foot orthoses. Present day, I guess it's probably club specific, or it's not the club, it's the individuals at the club. But certainly I know of physios at certain clubs that are very, very pro podiatry. The first time they think a podiatric sort of opinion on that player's lower limb mechanics or loading patterns is needed, they'll reach out. I'm sure that's not the case for all clubs and all medical teams, but yeah, certainly by the time I came along, I never got the sense that we weren't valued. I think you now look at like what a medical team looks like in elite sport. I mean, it's not just the physio and the doctor. Like it probably used to be two of them with a bag between them. Back in the 60s and 70s. Now you look at the team. You got the nutritionist, the sports psychologist. It's so broad. And why would podiatry not be part of that? It makes total sense that we're just one of the wheels or cogs in the wheel, so to speak. You probably remember. I don't know. You look younger than me, Andy, but you probably remember when Glenn Hoddle was England manager and he tried to bring in a psychologist. It wasn't that long ago. I remember what the media was saying. So,
is that Eileen Drury? You're referencing her, or is that a faith healer? I think, wasn't she?
Yeah, but he was the first person to basically. Yeah, I'm not saying I agree with what Eileen was doing, but he's the first person to think a bit more broadly, to think differently. You hear players talk about him now and sort of say like he was trying different stuff. Football world wasn't quite ready for it, right? Whereas actually now, you got all sorts of nonsense going. A lot of stuff going on that you think, oh my goodness, why are we still going over to Germany and having horse placenta rubbed on a sore ankle? Like, they'll do anything now just to get that player back on the pitch. So yeah, it makes total sense that podiatry is a part of that. And yeah, certainly the clubs I work with, I've always felt that my opinion is valued, and it's very much from a musculoskeletal perspective. It's this player's just signed from somewhere abroad and they've gone with foot ortho, because certain countries, I guess geographically, demographically, certain countries have different practices. So as players come from certain countries, you're almost certain they're going to have orthoses, even if they never had pain or injury. Some people just orthoses in every single player's boot. So there's one club that when a player comes from abroad and they've got orthoses, like, can you just check these are needed? Like, can you just check they're still appropriate? So yeah, constantly giving opinions on boots. Ended up saw a player once, made a few suggestions about how we might be able to modify the inside of their boot to sort of take some load off of their hurty tissue. And before I knew it, I'd been requested to join a Zoom call with the global manager for the company that was their boot sponsor, and suddenly I'm on a Zoom call with the club doctor, the club physio, and 3 people from New Balance. One's based in Boston, one's based in Asia, head of global football, head of design, and they're like, right, this player's of a level where we can make the boot for them. So like, instead of putting something in the boot, tell us how can we make it part of the stud plate? Tell us what that needs to look like. And you're on a call going, this is wild. But yeah, I guess I use that as an example of how, how I've always felt my opinion has been valued with the teams and the clubs that I've worked with.
Yeah, that's interesting, that sort of work then. So how does it work just from a business perspective for you? I guess you're an independent practitioner, but for those sort of calls, like, are you, how does that happen? Like, who's paying you to be there?
Am I billing my time for my time, you mean?
Yeah, basically.
I'm a terrible businessman, always have been. As I've already said, it took me a long time in life to get to a point where I realised I was quite academic, and then I funneled all of it into understanding the human body and mechanics and physics. I've got no bandwidth over here to learn about business. And my colleagues that do it, they juggle being a clinician and a business owner. I've got nothing but respect for them. I'm the sort of person that I've got an accountant. They do everything for me. All they do is tell me what to sign and when to sign it, what to pay and when to pay. I'm a horrible businessman. I will caveat this by saying that. So yeah, often if I'm jumping on a Zoom call, I just organise it for a time that I'm not in clinic or not. My week is juggled up between time in clinic seeing patients at Pure Sports Medicine and then time at QMUL in my teaching role there. As long as the meeting isn't on any of those days, whether it's like a Wednesday, lunchtime, which is my admin day, or whether it's an evening, I just jump on a call and I chat through it. I don't bill anyone for that time. Should I? I don't know. But listen, I love talking about this stuff. It doesn't feel cheesy. I know, but it's never felt like work. Like if someone said, even things like this, I get asked to do podcasts more than I ever thought I would do. Don't know why. Always worry that I've actually got anything interesting to say. And people say, come on a podcast. And then other people say to me, do you ever get paid for these? I was like, no, of course you don't. That's not the way the podcast world works. And they're like, but you're giving up hours of your time. I've probably given up, 30 hours of my life. The podcasting, but I'm talking about what I love. This doesn't feel like work. This feels like a coffee. We're having a coffee together. We're just not in the same room together, right? I don't charge people for a chat. So I don't bill for those kind of things. If I've gone to, there was a time when I'd go to sort of clubs training grounds for a day. If they had 3 or 4, if they got one player they want me to see, the physio normally texts me and says, I've got this. And often in football everything's urgent, isn't it? So you get a text saying, can you see this player? More often than not, they want to be seen that week. My clinic diary is completely full, but what I'll do is I'll say, right, I'm completely full on Monday, but come up at the end of my day and I'll take you on the end of my day and you'll be the last person I see. I'll just stay late. And all I do is, just like any person coming in to see me in clinic, they get billed for clinic, a clinic appointment. So if they bring a player to see me in clinic, they get charged, obviously. If they've got 4 or 5 players they want me to see at once, or previously we've gone and done pre-season screening for whatever value screening has is a lively debate. But if it's going to be day at the training ground, then you might bill them for you might send them an invoice for a day. But even that, early on, I'll be honest and say, if you said to me, oh, you got to go to this club's training ground for the day, the fact I'm even being let in a training ground, I don't need to get paid for that. I'm a football mad 12-year-old that's being told you can go and spend the day at training. I remember the first time I went to a training ground, Premier League training ground, I went in, and the physio said, we'll just go and get some breakfast before So we went up to the canteen, and it's all free, and you get some breakfast, you sit down, you look around the canteen, it's just like the first team, and you're like, why would I ask someone to pay me to do this? I should be paying them. This is like a fan experience to me. And then you go and do a kind of a morning session, and some players are out, and you come back and you all have lunch together. I remember this canteen where there was a load of flat screens along the wall. We're all having lunch, and they'd been doing sort of small game like rondo stuff that morning, the players, and it had all been recorded from loads of different angles. And as they sit and eat lunch, it's being played back on the TV so they can watch it. And they're sitting there just watching it, just go, oh, look at this bit. I'm about to nutmeg in here. And what you realise is these are just young guys just doing what they love. They're so normal. They are the most normal. And I just thought to myself, why on earth do I need to get paid for this? This is payment enough. Horrible business acumen, of course. But yeah, if people come and see me in clinic, they always get billed. But I do give away a lot of mine, or at least I used to give away a lot of my time. It's different now, but yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I remember Trevor saying something similar around that sort of stuff. Really, he's really sort of driven for it, and it's a fine balance for it. I mean, I'm always amazed when people just like, oh yeah, no, I'll give an hour for this, and it's like I feel very privileged that people are doing that. And yeah, no one's ever asked for any money actually, which is great. And so, like in terms of like I mean, also I agree. Whenever you go into a football club, I mean, you can tell that I've got a lot of friends in there, and it's not always a perfect environment. There's a lot of politics, and there's a lot of it's a very weird business, isn't it? It's not a normal business, even though it is technically a business. It's like you say, there's got these young men who's really in charge of this place. It's quite interesting from that side, but it's still amazingly exciting. You go in, it's got the pristine grass, amazing facility, all these really healthy looking people around. It is very it's exciting. And like, so in terms of like building your week now, I know you work with some other sports that you've done. So how do you see the differences between footballers, golfers, athletes, and anything else?
Yeah, there's some key differences at sort of I guess a fundamentally like an organisational level. So, for example, Premier League football, there is no there's no financial restraint. I think that won't surprise anyone to hear that. It's Premier League football.
Well, you're not even charging, so it's fine.
Well, yeah, absolutely. But if whatever you said to them they need, that the cost, you know what it's like in private practice. You say to people, oh, you might need a course of shockwave therapy, you might need a pair of custom-made orthosis. Those things carry costs with them that aren't insignificant to most people, but they are insignificant to Premier League footballers. So I guess across the sports, there are definitely sort of certain constraints in some sports and not in others. So, for example, Premier League football looks really, really different to, I do a bit of work with England badminton, the EIS. As you can imagine, their budgets look very, very different. That won't surprise anyone. You look across the sports, and also footballers are essentially employees. So they come with the physio. They often with physio will accompany them. The irony is, although they're the wealthiest people on the planet, they actually don't pay themselves. The club pays, etc. Whereas when we see professional golfers, I'm sure most people know golfers are self-employed. They are essentially when they fly to tournaments and put themselves up in hotels, they pay for that themselves. Whereas footballers, it's all paid for by the club. So golfers often would come in, they pay themselves. Obviously, they're very wealthy at the pointy end of the tour, but they often come in alone. There's no one with them. They're very, you look at most footballers, and some of them don't really, some of them are, they're there because they've been told they need to be there, but they don't really want to be there. They're more interested in what's going on their phone. It's popping off because of, they're busy people. They're being pulled in lots of different directions, but also they don't really always have the desire to know, or the desire or the care to know what's going on and why you're recommending what you're recommending. They basically, whatever you say, they're like, look, drop all of the jargon. How do I get on the pitch as soon as possible? If you need to put something in my boot, just put it in. I don't need the backstory. You speak to a golfer, funnily enough, after decades of being videoed, watching their swing back, having kind of, coaching on their swing, they're very, very particular about, their club face being a couple of degrees open, a couple of degrees closed, because that can make a big difference to the shape of their shot. Funnily enough, when you show them a video of their gait or how their foot's behaving, they want details. They are very, very detail specific. They're very, very concerned about how something in their shoe might influence their transition from their backswing through to impact. So it's not just employed versus self-employed, wealthy sports versus less wealthy sports. The actual individuals, they're different. I guess the people that play football, let's make horrible generalizations. People that play certain sports, certainly rugby, golf, historically, you'd expect them to probably be a bit less working class than people that play football. Because certain sports carry with them, certainly growing up, I grew up very working class. I didn't play golf. It was completely inaccessible to me and my family growing up. Bit different now, I know, but you played golf, you probably started with a bit of privilege. So yeah, there's lots of different moving parts, different psychologies of the players, different money, but ultimately you're there to do a job. The job probably shouldn't look that different from our perspective. But as we know, dealing with people, if they're different, then how we interact is going to be different as well. So, across the sports, I've been lucky enough to work in football, golf, rugby, Olympic Games. And obviously, when I was at the Olympic Games in the Athletes' Village, I'm suddenly seeing sports people of sports I don't even really understand. And I've always said this, I've always maintained that you don't have to be a great sports person, or you don't have to love sport to treat sports injuries. You don't have to. Some of the smartest people I know aren't particularly sporty, but they just really understand, movement mechanics. But I think it helps. I think the athlete likes it. I think if you understand the sport, the demands of the sport, it does help for sure. So it helps when you love football or golf or athletics, when you're treating those people. But suddenly you find yourself in Olympic Games and you're treating a handball player. Don't see many of those in London, typically. Or, you're treating sports, some of those more obscure sports. You're suddenly like, oh my goodness, I don't know the demands of handball on the human foot. So you find yourself on YouTube watching lots of handball, watching the movements they make. A footballer comes in and first thing we ask them is, are you right-footed, left-footed? What position do you play? Because actually suddenly we now know the demands of the right foot of a left winger. They're probably going to be constantly running, doing high volumes of running. An old school winger in my mind, at least, not the new one that cuts back all the time. They're going to be swinging the ball in, so they're going to be standing on their right ankle and rotating around it. Like knowing the sport, knowing the position really helps, I think, understand the demands on the foot and ankle. Handball, I had no idea. So you suddenly have to go back to your basics. So across the sports, I think if you're going to treat sports people, it really helps. If you love sport, it really helps if you understand the sport that you are treating as well.
Yeah. No, I can see that perspective on it. And then in terms of, you said you're a horrible business person. Like, how do you cope with suggesting different things to your clients? So there's one bit for you in your business, but when I think there can be barriers for people who if selling or sales is ever mentioned, they absolutely sort of cringe inside. How do you manage that from when you're suggesting something that may cost money or whatever?
Yeah, it's never felt like a sales pitch to me. I've always been I just try and be as honest and open and transparent as I can be, and say, look, this is the problem as we see it. This is what we think the sort of optimum route to recovery is, and here are some of the interventions that might get you there. I think, when you're thinking about podiatrists, the biggest thing you're thinking about sales-wise often is foot orthoses, which we know in private practice, particularly if they're custom-made, can carry with them fairly big price tags. But I'm always just really sort of pragmatic about it. I say, look, this is what we're recommending. This is what we think it has the ability, how we think it has the ability to help. Look, I come back to my pharmacology analogies all the time. Like I said at the start, harping back to them, I basically say, look, these things, there's no guarantee with them. Yes, they're expensive, and yes, you're looking at them going, this is a tangible thing I've just paid for. It's an intervention. But I said, what medical interventions carry with them complete guarantees of success? That isn't the way anything works. So I'll often say, if you have a headache and you were prescribed a painkiller, it might work and it might not. You give 10 people the same painkiller, you don't get 10 identical responses. And some people, they say, I've still got a headache. I need a bigger dose, or I need a different drug. Other people, they say, great, my headache's gone. And there might even be one person over here that has a horrible allergic reaction. I said, when we give foot orthoses, some people have great responses. Some people, they say, yeah, they're comfortable, but they're not really helping. And other people have not an allergic reaction, but an adverse reaction, where something, they need suddenly, now my back's hurting. I was like, we'll treat you exactly the same. If we gave you a drug and we would look at your response to it, and then we would modify our response to your response. We would change the drug, or up the dose, or lower the dose. That's what orthoses are. They're not this magical thing, wear these and they work or they don't. It's something we're prescribing. We're then going to modify based on your response. I'm just completely transparent about why I think they're, if at that point in time, why I think they are a good candidate for considering this, what the possible benefits are, what the limitations and risks are. And then at the end, of course, and by the way, this thing, you're in a private clinic, this thing carries a cost. And again, if at that point they say, well, I don't really want to do that, that's fine. In my documentation, there's been no, you must do this. We're not paternalistic here. This isn't medicine in the 1980s. This is a therapeutic alliance where we're hopefully, building some kind of rapport where we have an understanding of, I'm trying to meet the patient where they are. They're appreciating what I'm recommending to them, and ultimately they make a decision. So it's never ever felt like a sale to me. And because I don't push it, what it means is two things. Firstly, I I don't prescribe loads of orthoses anyway, but some of that's because I think they're overprescribed, and some of it is because when I do recommend them, maybe I'm not that pushy, so people aren't going for it. As a result, I don't drive a particularly fancy car. I can live with that. That's fine. Like I say, I got into this to be a people person. And, I got away from the lab, or the potential lab that was in my future, and now I'm like, well, I don't want to be in a lab, but I'm not a salesperson either. I'm a healthcare professional. So yeah, I generally find that as long as I just remind myself this is a recommendation. Just the same way we said what we'd recommend is this group of exercises. We've looked at your problem, we've appraised your problem. We think what really, really helps you in this moment in time is this group of exercises. Go away and do them. That's a recommendation, but for some reason people are happier doing that because it doesn't carry any cost. They just need to actually physically go and do it. I just treat anything we're physically selling, like orthoses, as the same. Like, we've recommended your shoes, we've recommended your exercises, we've recommended your orthoses. Ideally, you do all of these things. And which ones you decide to do or not decide to do is ultimately patient's decision. So yeah, I've never struggled with the sales, but then I've never really considered myself a salesperson.
Yeah, I think it's a healthy way to do it. I think Claire Small articulated it really well, and you're just recommending best practice, and that's essentially what you think is going to help that patient most, and then it's their decision. You're just presenting the different options for it. So what would you say, like, just as a final question then, what would your advice be for people looking to get into this line of work or healthcare in general?
And what would my advice be? It would be to take your time and not, I see this with my kids. I see it, with, this is, I'm conscious when I'm about to potentially go into an old man ranting at the clouds kind of scenario, but I get messages sometimes from people in their, undergraduate degrees. They're not graduated yet. And maybe they've, I don't know, listened to a podcast I've done or seen me talk at a conference, or they've accidentally stumbled across my website or whatever it is. And they look at your sort of CV, and I'm approaching my 25th year. I started podiatry school in 2000. So, here we are 25 years later. So they look at your CV. What they don't see is 25 years. What they don't see is those 3 years of diabetic foot ulcers. They don't see any of that stuff. They just see, oh, look, this guy works in elite sport, or this guy works at Pure Sports Medicine, or he's got a clinical academic post. They see all the things that perhaps they would like. And I get an email sometimes from someone, I'm in my second year of podiatry school. Just wondered if you've got any tips for how I can have a career like yours. And I don't even know how to answer that question, but the answer is take your time. If for the first couple of years you need to, are we allowed to swear on this podcast? I don't know.
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, right. Here's something that someone once said to me, sometimes you got to eat shit for a little bit of time, haven't you? You don't go into you don't go into Goldman Sachs and go straight up to senior level. They make you eat shit for a couple of years. They make you learn the ropes. Whether it's a career at Goldman Sachs or a career in a healthcare profession, your first few years might not look like what you want your career to look like every day for the rest of your life. Mine didn't. So it would be take your time. It would be find your path. Don't worry if it doesn't feel like I've been qualified 2 years and I'm still not doing what I love to do. There's loads of time. These things, they evolve, they're gradual. I think, again, mindful that I did all of this in an era pre-social media. So I think the challenge we have with social media now is that pressure that people feel to firstly sort of show what they're doing, or secondly, we know social media is not real. We know it's not real. It's the curated best bits of people's day, and you follow certain other professionals, and they, you look at them in clinic, and you go, oh my goodness, they've got such a dream job compared to mine. No, they haven't. It's not real. So yeah, I would say chill out on social media a little bit. Don't feel the need to constantly post on there. You're spending 2 hours a day on social media. When we were new grads, we spent 2 hours a day reading articles. You'll get where you need to go. Just pump the brakes a little bit. Have a plan. Obviously, have a plan. Do the things you can to kind of navigate the plan, but just chill a little bit. 2-3 years out of uni, if you're not suddenly working in professional cricket, don't worry. there's a route you need to take, and be patient. Patience, I guess, is what I'm describing, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think it's definitely good advice, and you can tell that you obviously do love what you're doing. You can see that, and I think sometimes that people do forget. Actually, you can enjoy this stuff. Don't take it too seriously. Enjoy it. Try different things. Like you say, you don't have to get everything right all the time, and sometimes you do something and think, actually, I did really enjoy that.
Yeah, agree. Someone described it to me once. You talk about the sort of career pathway. That's a term used a lot, isn't it? A pathway. And someone described it to me once as well. It's not so much a pathway, which just feels like a straight concrete, pavement, doesn't it? It's not really a pathway. It's more like the trails in the woods, where it's not always completely obvious at first. It's not really delineated. You might wander down one trail and be like, oh, this isn't quite where I thought it was going to go. So you might go back and go down another one, or you might wander down one trail and then find a side trail and sidestep into another trail. Like it's messy. It's life, human life. It's not supposed to be easy, is it?
Yeah, well, on that, that's that realistic note. Thank you very much for sharing that. It's really enjoyable, and it is great to see you so enthusiastic about doing what you're doing, and the fact it was so random with bumping into that guy in a chemistry class sort of makes it even more interesting, really. But that is the nature of all stuff, isn't it? Little things do have a big impact on where you're going, but it's up to you what you do with it.
Yeah, I wish I'd got his name. Maybe he went on. Maybe
He's a pharmacologist now. He's working.
Yeah, he works at Glaxo. Welcome.
Yeah, he wanted that job that he wanted you for. Get rid of this fella. Yeah, brilliant. Look, really appreciate your time, Ian. Thank you very much for sharing.
Thanks, mate.
Cheers.